Georgia in the British imperial system, a colonial nexus. Introduction: Georgia's place in the Grand Imperial Design. The founding of Georgia in 1732 marked the final chapter in Britain's establishment of its 13 North American colonies. While Georgia is often remembered for its philanthropic origins and social experiments, its true significance within the British Empire was as a linchpin in imperial strategy, a buffer against rival European powers, a source of raw materials, and a participant in the Atlantic world's complex web of trade and defense. This blog explores Georgia's multifaceted role in the British imperial system, focusing on its strategic, economic, and political functions, and its evolving relationships with London and its fellow American colonies. Imperial strategy, trade, defense, and the triangular economy. A. Georgia as a strategic buffer. 1. Defense against Spanish and French threats. Georgia's founding was driven by the British need to secure their southern frontier. The colony's location, directly north of Spanish Florida, made it a critical buffer zone. The British Crown and Parliament saw Georgia as a protective barrier for the more prosperous South Carolina, which was vulnerable to Spanish incursions and influence. The construction of military outposts, such as Fort Frederica on St. Simon's Island, and the recruitment of Scottish Highlanders for settlement in Darien, underscored Georgia's defensive role. The Battle of Bloody Marsh in 1742, where Oglethorpe's forces repelled a Spanish invasion, was a defining moment that validated Georgia's strategic purpose. 2. Protection of the Carolina Lowcountry. South Carolina's wealth, generated by rice and indigo plantations, was vital to the British Empire. Georgia's existence provided a crucial layer of protection for these economic assets, safeguarding trade routes and plantations from foreign attack and potential slave uprisings incited by Spanish agents. B. Economic contributions to the mercantile system. 1. Diversification of raw materials. The trustees envisioned Georgia as a producer of commodities Britain imported from rivals: silk, wine, and olive oil. While these ventures largely failed due to climate and expertise issues, the ambition reflected Georgia's intended role in imperial trade. 2. Naval stores and timber. Georgia's forests supplied naval stores, tar, pitch, turpentine, and timber, essential for the Royal Navy and British shipping. These products were in high demand and helped maintain Britain's maritime supremacy. 3. Indigo and rice, post-slavery ban. After the ban on slavery was lifted in 1750, Georgia rapidly adopted a plantation economy, producing lucrative cash crops like indigo and rice. These commodities were highly valued in Britain and contributed significantly to the imperial economy, further integrating Georgia into the mercantile system. C. The triangular trade and Atlantic economy. 1. Imports from Britain. Georgia imported British manufactured goods, textiles, tools, firearms, and luxury items, in exchange for its raw materials, reinforcing the mercantile relationship. 2. Exports to Britain and the Caribbean. Georgia's agricultural products, initially timber and naval stores, later rice and indigo, were shipped to Britain. The colony also exported provisions and timber to the British Caribbean, which relied on mainland colonies for food and building materials. 3. The transatlantic slave trade. After 1750, Georgia became a direct participant in the transatlantic slave trade. Enslaved Africans were brought to labor on plantations, a brutal but economically central component of the Atlantic economy. This human cargo was exchanged for rum, manufactured goods, and other commodities, completing the triangle. 2. Georgia's role in the Southern economy and the Atlantic world. A. Integration with the Southern colonies. 1. Economic competition and cooperation. Initially, Georgia struggled to compete with South Carolina's established plantation economy due to restrictions on slavery and landholding. Once these restrictions were lifted, Georgia's economic model converged with South Carolina's, focusing on large-scale production of rice and indigo. This led to both competition for markets and cooperation in defense and trade. 2. Shared labor systems. The adoption of enslaved labor cemented Georgia's place within the Southern slave society. Legal codes, social structures, and racial hierarchies in Georgia mirrored those in other Southern colonies, creating a shared regional identity. 3. Intercolonial trade. Georgia engaged in significant intercolonial trade, exchanging its products for goods from other colonies. For example, it supplied timber and provisions to the Caribbean and received rum and molasses in return. B. Connections to the wider Atlantic world. 1. European immigration. Georgia attracted diverse European immigrant groups, Salzburgers, Scots, Swiss, and others, who brought their own cultures, skills, and connections, making Georgia a microcosm of broader European migration patterns. 2. Indigenous trade networks. Georgia was part of extensive indigenous trade networks. European goods, particularly firearms and textiles, were exchanged for deerskins and other furs, integrating Georgia into a system that stretched far into the North American interior. This trade was crucial for the colony's early survival and diplomatic relations with Native American nations like the Creek and Cherokee. 3. Imperial Wars. Georgia was a front line in the imperial wars between Britain, Spain, and France. Conflicts like the War of Jenkins' Ear and the French and Indian War directly impacted the colony, shaping its military development and relationship with the Crown. 3. The colony's relationship with London and the other American colonies. A. The relationship with London, from trusteeship to royal colony. 1. Trusteeship. 1732-1752. Georgia was governed by a board of trustees in London, with Oglethorpe as resident trustee. This direct control meant London exerted significant influence over every aspect of colonial life, from land distribution to labor policies. The trustees' utopian ideals often clashed with the realities on the ground, leading to friction with settlers who desired more autonomy and economic freedom. 2. Royal Colony, 1752-1776. By 1752, the trustees, facing mounting settler discontent and economic struggles, surrendered their charter, and Georgia became a royal colony. This brought Georgia more in line with other British colonies, with a royal governor appointed by the Crown, an elected assembly, and a more conventional system of governance. This shift allowed for greater local self-governance, though ultimate authority still rested with Parliament and the King. 3. Imperial oversight and taxation. As a royal colony, Georgia was subject to British imperial policies, including trade regulations, navigation acts, and eventually taxation measures like the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts. These policies, designed to benefit the mother country, often generated resentment among colonists who felt their economic interests were being subordinated to those of Britain. B. Relationship with other American colonies. 1. Dependence on South Carolina. In its early years, Georgia was heavily dependent on South Carolina for supplies, trade, and military support. Many of Georgia's early settlers came from South Carolina, bringing with them their economic practices and social expectations, including the desire for enslaved labor, shared grievances, and growing unity. As British imperial policies became more restrictive after the French and Indian War, Georgia, like other colonies, began to experience shared grievances. While initially more cautious due to its reliance on British subsidies and its vulnerable frontier, Georgia eventually joined the growing movement for colonial rights. Participation in Continental Congresses. Georgia sent delegates to the Continental Congresses, participating in the intercolonial discussions and decisions that led to the American Revolution. Though its participation was sometimes delayed or less enthusiastic than that of older, more established colonies, it ultimately cast its lot with the other colonies in declaring independence. 4. Economic ties and rivalries. Economic ties, particularly in the southern agricultural economy, fostered a sense of regional identity among Georgia and its neighbors. However, there were also rivalries, particularly over land claims and trade routes, which sometimes led to disputes. The impact of imperial policies on Georgia. A. Navigation Acts. The Navigation Acts were a series of English laws that restricted colonial trade to benefit the mother country. Georgia, like other colonies, was required to ship certain enumerated goods, like rice, indigo, and naval stores, exclusively to Britain or other British colonies, even if better prices could be found elsewhere. This ensured that Britain controlled the flow of valuable raw materials, and reaped the profits from their processing and resale. B. Salutary neglect and its end. For much of the early 18th century, Britain practiced a policy of salutary neglect, loosely enforcing imperial laws as long as the colonies remained economically loyal. This allowed colonies like Georgia a degree of de facto autonomy. However, after the costly French and Indian War, 1754-1763, Britain ended salutary neglect, imposing new taxes and stricter controls to pay off its war debt and assert greater authority over its colonies. This shift directly contributed to the growing tensions that led to the Revolution C. Proclamation of 1763. The Proclamation of 1763, issued after the French and Indian War, prohibited colonial settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains. While intended to prevent conflict with Native Americans and reduce imperial expenses, it angered many colonists, including Georgians, who saw it as an infringement on their right to expand westward and access new lands. D. Taxation without representation. Like other colonies, Georgia protested British attempts to impose taxes, e.g. the Stamp Act, Townshend Acts, without colonial representation in Parliament. While Georgia's response was sometimes more muted due to its dependence on British protection and subsidies, the principle of no taxation without representation resonated deeply. V. Georgia on the eve of revolution. By the 1770s, Georgia was a rapidly growing, prosperous royal colony, deeply integrated into the British imperial system. Its economy was thriving on rice and indigo. Its population was expanding, and its strategic importance remained high. However, the increasing assertiveness of British imperial policy, coupled with the growing spirit of independence among its sister colonies, forced Georgians to confront their allegiance. The decision to join the revolution was not unanimous and was fraught with internal divisions between loyalists and patriots. Yet, ultimately, the desire for self-governance, economic autonomy, and a shared sense of American identity prevailed, leading Georgia to cast its lot with the other colonies in the fight for independence. Conclusion: a legacy of imperial influence. Georgia's journey from a philanthropic experiment to a royal colony deeply embedded in the British imperial system is a testament to the powerful forces of geopolitics, economics, and human ambition. Its role as a strategic buffer, a supplier of raw materials, and a participant in the Atlantic economy shaped its development in profound ways. The imperial strategy of trade and defense dictated much of Georgia's early existence, while its integration into the southern economy and the wider Atlantic world defined its economic and social structure. The complex relationship with London, evolving from direct trusteeship to royal oversight, and its growing ties with other American colonies, ultimately set the stage for its participation in the American Revolution. Understanding Georgia's place within the British Empire is crucial for comprehending not only its own colonial history, but also the broader dynamics that led to the birth of the United States. It highlights how even the most idealistic colonial ventures were ultimately shaped by the grand designs and intricate workings of a global imperial power.